And we're back like we never left. Oregon fans, what's going on? How we living? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. It's Monday, June 3rd, 2024, and we got another big episode for you in store today. I'm your host, Max Torres with Scoop Duck On3, and we got a lot to get into with my guy, Justin Hopkins, talking some Oregon football recruiting. But before we do that, you guys know how it goes. The Ducks Dish podcast is brought to you in part by Ranchito Grill in Springfield. Not sure what your plans are for dinner tonight, but you should head on over to Ranchito at 1537 Mohawk Boulevard. They got homemade tortillas, great food, great environment, and they will take care of you. Say what's up to my guy Ruben and let him know that Max Torres sent you. Like I said, not rolling solo today. Joined once again by Scoop Duck owner and publisher Justin Hopkins. Justin, how we doing?
Good. Just finished up and back to Salem, which, if you live in Southern Oregon, you know that's about 3-ish hours away. So it was I spent a lot of time in a car. But Tucker had a basketball tournament, so but I did have some fun and got to have some good beers up there in the area, and just because I'm talking about it, I had my first Toxic burger in the Eugene area on the way home, which was a good burger too. But
Very
yeah,
cool.
We're good.
Nice. Sounds like a fun little Sunday activity. We're recording this on Sunday, but it'll be out probably on Monday morning. So that's why I did the whole thing with the dates there. But yeah, Justin, let's get into some recruiting. The big story that we kind of wanted to start off for today on this episode is some transfer portal recruiting, which was a little interesting because myself and I think everybody else in the Oregon football community thought that the Ducks were done in the transfer portal. But I know you had the story on this one. So what's the latest you're hearing as far as some Oregon and transfer portal recruiting?
Yeah, I'm with you, and I think with everybody, kind of thought Oregon was done, but it looks like they are continuing to talk with former Texas A&M offensive lineman slash center Bryce Foster. He has been out to Eugene for a visit already, and it sounds like he's coming back next weekend or this coming weekend, I guess, as you watch it. The June, the June 5th weekend, 6th weekend. Anyways, he'll be out for that. Did mention the track and field college championships that will be taking place this coming weekend as well in Eugene, and coming out to support some of his teammates at Texas A&M. But, I haven't particularly checked on this, but, this could be a situation where this is one of those that potentially, might come to Oregon and not cost a scholarship, because we both know they can kind of circumvent that with NIL in some cases. So I wonder if that's the case, but either way, it looks like Oregon might be potentially adding to the offensive line, and Foster makes a lot of sense if you think about it. I mean, he has center experience. I know there's been some maybe concerns about his drive, but if he's showing up and coming to Oregon, whether it's on scholarship or not, I think it's a really good depth piece. If Oregon was counting on him to be the guy and be a starter, maybe a tad bit more concerning, but him coming and kind of being an insurance piece out on the interior of that offensive line, that's a pretty good insurance interior piece, if you ask me.
It's definitely a good piece. I think if you're Oregon and looking to kind of shore up your depth a little bit, certainly along the interior, I think that it's a good situation for both sides, right? And for people who maybe don't know too much about Bryce Foster, he's from Texas A&M, like you mentioned, Justin, but he was originally a 4-star recruit in the 2021 class out of Taylor High School in Katy, Texas. So he's a guy that came out to Oregon as a recruit and was a pretty big name that was tightly linked to Oregon, but is a guy that also has that track and field background. I think he's a thrower, if memory serves. So that's something that I think would obviously benefit Oregon's angle there in the recruiting process. But for Oregon, with this kind of change into the guard, if you will, at center between Jackson Powers Johnson and now Iapani Poncho Laulaulu, I think that this is a good situation because your backup center had essentially been Marcus Harper, who is a left guard. And now if you're able to, hypothetically, right, let's just look at if they're able to get him, or just kind of how we're looking at this. If you're able to get a guy like Bryce Foster, you have some experience, a guy who's played some good football already He's played in the SEC. And at the end of the day, you just want to give yourself more options. And obviously, along the offensive line, the injuries are going to pop up every now and then. So I think that this makes a lot of sense for Oregon.
Yeah, and that's the way I look at it, right? Like if Bryce Foster's coming and he's, let's say he does come to Oregon and all of a sudden he's the presumed starter, maybe that piece, you might have a little bit of concern there. But if he's coming and he's basically an insurance piece, which is what it looks like, he's a guy that can get in the rotation and can give, maybe one of the guards a break, or can give, Poncho a break, or again, who knows, injuries come up, or, and it might not even be a full game injury, right? You might miss a quarter, you might miss a series, you might miss whatever. But we both know, because we witnessed it before at Oregon, if you can't snap the ball, you literally can't run the offense. So it's not one of those things that's, so simple that you just go get up under center. Like, it doesn't work that way. So really good, depth piece for Oregon. And again, I got a feeling he'll get some play because he'll be out there at certain points. And we both know you get in that later part of the season, and now the season's even longer because of the new playoff schedule and whatnot. So having those extra bodies, being able, especially on the offensive or defensive line, those big bodies, I see tremendous benefit there for Oregon in this case.
Moving right along, let's talk about another big name on Oregon's recruiting big board, specifically in the 2025 class, and that is Duncanville, Texas quarterback Keyon Russell. He was one of a bunch of really talented recruits that we saw out in Nashville earlier this, last week now, for the On3 Elite Series. And Justin, he's a name that has a lot of Oregon fans talking. Obviously, he's teammates with Dorian Brew, the #1 wide receiver in the country. But this is a recruitment that has drawn a lot of buzz because he's verbally committed to SMU. But I think we both and everyone else kind of knows it's a soft commitment at this point. But you have teams like Alabama and Oregon are in the mix. And Russell's coming off an official visit out in Tuscaloosa this weekend. So I think this is a guy that makes a little bit of sense to check in on, because just to the disclaimer, he was the only guy that I wasn't able to talk to in Nashville. But I think that he's pretty easy to get a hold of. So I wasn't too worried about it. I got everybody else I wanted.
Yeah, as we both know, he's been real responsive on the phone, with us at least. And that's a great sign if you're covering Oregon, because I do find a connection there. The guys that typically respond more, seem to have a little bit more genuine interest in your school. Of course, that doesn't apply to everybody, because some kids just don't talk. And that's the way, like Dallas Wilson doesn't talk, but he's an Oregon commit, So in terms of Russell, and I think why we're going over him real quick is, just because the new developments this weekend, obviously visited Alabama. I think ourselves and many others expected Alabama to be a major player here. He's talked about them quite a bit the last couple of weeks, and some predictions have come in favor of Alabama after this visit. So, I guess why we're talking about it is like, okay, well, what does that mean? I think it just really means that you kind of keep an eye on seeing if he opens his commitment up from SMU. Does he commit to Alabama? Does he, take the official visit that he has scheduled to Oregon? I know he's got a couple of visits scheduled. Does he commit and still take those visits? Just kind of want to put it on everybody's radar. There's a little bit of movement there. Again, the good news is, you would definitely love to get Keyon Russell. It would certainly help with the Dorian Brew, but really it's a luxury addition for Oregon, being as they have a Keely Smith Jr. committed already. So it'll just kind of, this recruitment will be interesting to watch for the next week, and then whatever happens in the next week, maybe for the next couple of weeks, to see if he's, still going to take his visit to Oregon and whatnot.
And there's a lot of wrinkles that we could see pop up here, Justin, right? Like, kind of like you mentioned, does he decommit? Does he flip and decommit at the same time? There's a lot of different possibilities about kind of what's next in this recruitment. But the good thing for Oregon fans that maybe is worth mentioning here, when I got to talk to Dorian Brew out in Nashville, the top wide receiver, he said that as of right now, the plan is for Keyon and Dorian to take their official visits to Oregon on that same June 21st weekend. So I think when you see some momentum like an RPM coming in from Fong for Alabama, it kind of makes you, perks your ears a little bit, or at least makes you look a little bit closer at the screen. But now Oregon kind of has to try to stay in the mix here the best they can. with that time between now and his official visit out to Eugene in these next 3 weeks or so. But the RPM from Wiltfong wasn't a big surprise for me. Just talking to people over the last week or so, that was kind of and I wrote this on the board just a couple days ago. Like that's just kind of the direction this one's been heading as far as is Oregon going to be able to hold off Alabama, and maybe they do have a pretty solid shot as the number 2 here, if based on nothing else than just how strongly he speaks about Oregon and also just his relationship with DeCorian Moore and that possibility, because Oregon is the only school that has offered both DeCorian and Keyon Russell for whatever it's worth. But I think that's basically all we had on that one. Justin, if you're cool with moving on to our next guy here in the rundown.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, we're going to keep it rolling. Let's stay in the state of Texas. Let's look at one of Oregon's top cornerback targets, and that is Conroe, Texas cornerback Dorian Brew. He is a truly elite talent, and he was another guy that was out there in Nashville for On3 Elite. And Justin, this was an interesting one to follow because he is a big name that we knew had that Oregon offer. He's been out to Eugene one time. It was earlier this year in the spring, and the Ducks have kind of just quietly stayed involved. I don't think they necessarily have a lot of momentum here with Dorian Brew, but they are one of a handful of schools that are going to be getting an official visit from Brew, which I think obviously bodes well for just staying in the mix.
Yeah, staying in the mix is the key there, right? I mean, I think Ohio State's probably the team to beat currently. I think most people view it that way. Once again, another Oregon-Ohio State battle, as we've heard over and over. But, in the case of Brew, you're going to get an official visit, so that's the start. I think he's kind of talked about maybe making a summer decision or, like a July decision or whatever you want to call it. But that's not set in stone. So you kind of wonder, will he take his recruitment, into the fall, what that'll look like. And, I've said this before. I'll say, Ohio State's not going to sign all these 5 stars at DB. They already got a couple. They could get Brew. They could get, some more. But I think, if you're Oregon, you're kind of hedging your bets that, hey, look, we could get some of these guys too. And so I think that's what you're seeing here. The one thing I wonder is, the track and field angle. Oregon's got obviously a really good track and field program, and he's an elite athlete in track and field. So you kind of wonder if that might be something, that, piques his interest a little bit. And, again, we talked about this in the last episode. I think it's worth repeating with some of these guys. They're going to want to see what happens in some of the seasons with these coaches. They're going to want to see, how does Ohio State perform? How does Oregon perform? How does Texas perform? What coaches, might move on in the offseason or whatever the case might be. Because the reality is this, we haven't talked about it yet, but it's a totally different pod, of course, but you kind of wonder, Ryan Day is not on the hot seat. That's not what I'm suggesting here, but it certainly feels like there's a lot of eyeballs and a lot of pressure on Ohio State to not only have a good season, but to ultimately be playing for a national championship. It feels like, that's where the bar is, and anything under that isn't acceptable. And again, I'm not saying if they make it to the playoff semifinal and lose that Ryan Day is going to be fired, but it certainly feels like there's a lot of pressure on Ohio State to win it all this year. So we'll just it's a storyline worth tracking. It's not hyperbole. And again, that's going to affect some of these recruits like Dorian Brew and Naim Offord and others.
I'm glad you mentioned Ohio State there, because I think that is kind of the school that seems to be leading as of right now. But I'm hoping to get Mick Walker from Letterman Row our Ohio State On3 site on my pod before long, maybe even this week, just to talk about some of that overlap and just how things are going out in Columbus for the Buckeyes. Just some other schools that are involved here with Dorian Brew. You got LSU. They're going to get an official visit. USC, Texas, Ohio State. Dorian Brew is scheduled to take his official visit to Oregon on June 14th. And then what he told me in the interview is that he's trying to decide in the last week of June. So hasn't set that commitment date just yet, but that's just a little bit more intel there on kind of where this one maybe stands. But Tosh Lapoy and Rashad Wadoud, Chris Hampton, all in frequent contact with Dorian Brew. So I think Oregon definitely has some ground to make up here, but it's definitely a long way from being over, which is kind of crazy to say because we're just getting into June, but that's really where this all kind of sits right now. And maybe that's a good big picture point to just hit on here for a sec, Justin, because I was talking to one of my buddies the other day just about Oregon recruiting and kind of where things are at. Because I think we were saying, like, other than Noah McHale, what defensive prospects does it really feel like Oregon has a somewhat clear lead on? I know Texas A&M is still lurking there for Noah McHale. I'm not too worried about USC, but I have my RPM in for McHale to go to Oregon. So just how do you kind of feel about that? The fact that Oregon's maybe not clearly leading for some of these top defensive targets, but at the same time, you have to keep in mind there's still a lot of runway left here.
A lot of runway. And so far, what we've learned about Lanning, and again, recruiting's changing every year. It's in the last 5 years, it's changed every year. And what I mean by that is you think, and it wasn't, I'd have to look, but it probably wasn't farther than 5 years ago. We didn't have an early signing day, right? And now that's like the preemptive signing day. February signing day is nothing, and now it's December. That wasn't a thing 5 years ago. And then you've added NIL to the mix, and now these kids can take official visits in the spring. And just my point is it's literally changing every year, and it's main things. It's not like something small. These are big things in recruiting. And now all of a sudden, like you said, setting the table, here we are in June, what figures to be a massive month in recruiting. Maybe by massive, it doesn't mean Oregon lands 10 commits. It doesn't need to mean that. But we might come out of June with a couple commits, maybe some clarity on where they stand with some of these elite guys, maybe some clarity on what these elite guys will do in terms of, hey, I'm ready to make a decision, or I'm not ready to make a decision. I will continue my recruiting into the fall and into my senior year. We don't know. Like, it's kind of an evolving thing because the June official visit period has never been like it is this year. This year it's absolutely nuts, right? It used to be JUCOs could do it, but now it's JUCOs and preps. And so now we're seeing everybody's taking all their trips in June every weekend. So how will Lanning close, right? That's one of the things I want to get to. My point was he's been a pretty incredible closer when it comes down to it. And by that has been in that November to December period. We've seen Oregon kind of linger for some guys that might have committed elsewhere, and Oregon's doubled back on. Peyton Bowen comes to mind. There's a few that Oregon kind of made a splash there at the end. And so you just kind of wonder, like, okay, is Oregon really wanting to forge really good relationships with a Dorian Brew, for example, or somebody else who might commit at the end of June, but they'll keep leaning on them in the season. They'll keep leaning on them in the fall. And here's why I say this, and here's my point. With NIL now, okay, you're not typically wise to throw out your best offer in March, April, May, June, July, because all that does is give somebody else a negotiating tool to, okay, well, that's Oregon's offer. And again, I'm not saying that NIL is everything, but let's not pretend it's not a big part of recruiting anymore, especially with these guys. Mm-hmm. So for Oregon, you think, okay, now we know maybe Dorian Brew commits to Ohio State July 1st, and Oregon just kind of hangs around and says, all right, we'll just keep recruiting him and double back in November. And maybe their offer gets better, and at that point, things happen. So I think, again, it's kind of hard because we need to see what happens, and we need to see who Oregon might land and who they might not land. And then fans are going to have to remember in July, like, okay, maybe Oregon literally misses on all of them in July, misses on every 5-star defensive prospect they're going after. But we're still going to have to wait till November and December to get an actual grade because we don't know what will happen. And I just I have confidence in Dan Lanning, and it's kind of like, it's really refreshing to feel that way about a staff. Like, you know what, these guys could miss on every single one of them, and I still believe that they'll end up signing some of them when it comes December. But we don't know. We don't know the future. And so anyways, that's just a rant. I know that was a long rant, and I just talked a lot, but I don't know what you think about all that, Max.
No, it was good stuff. It was good stuff for sure. And I think another part of it too that kind of goes to your point is, like, NIL makes it harder to get a true pulse or a true feel for something, because you could be hearing, okay, this guy's going wherever one day, and then the next day, oh no, actually he's trending over here. So you got to play the long game, and that's definitely what the Ducks are doing with a handful of these guys. And a perfect example to one of your points that you were saying about just continuing to recruit even if you miss on a guy. I was listening to our Inside Texas guys, Justin Wells and Eric over the other day, and they were talking about Dijon Lee at the Mission Viejo. He had the top four with Washington, Alabama, Georgia, and A&M, but then he added Texas into one of his top schools he's going to be considering. He's going to take a midweek official visit. And the point that Justin, I think, said, he's like, well, you bring him out for a midweek OV or just an OV in general, and then maybe you just, kind of get the ball rolling, so to speak, there. And then you still have all that time, throughout the season to see, hey, okay, do you want to come back for a visit? Remember when you were out here, in the summer and you really enjoyed yourself? Well, maybe something like that. But that's just to your point that you got to play the long game. And the summer, it's important, but it's not going to be a disaster if Oregon can't land some of these guys. And I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen. I think they still have a really good shot at Noah McHale and Deshaun Brain. But let's move into our next guy, Justin. Rolling right along here on the Ducks Dish podcast. If you're watching us here on the Scoop Duck YouTube channel, make sure to subscribe to the channel and drop a like on the video. Justin and I have been doing a lot of great stuff over on the site and bringing you guys that Oregon recruiting content that you love. So let's talk about our next guy here, staying on defense. It's a defensive heavy day on the Ducks Dish podcast, but we're talking about 2025 cornerback Naim Offord, currently committed to Ohio State, coming out of Birmingham, Alabama. He is one of two top flight cornerbacks that the Buckeyes have in the fold in 2025, along with Devin Sanchez. But the big deal with him, Justin, as we all know, he's committed to Ohio State, but he took an unofficial visit out to Eugene just last month in May. And things must have gone pretty well because, hey, would you look at that? Now he has an official visit set up to Oregon, likely in June. I don't have a date on that one just yet, but I think that's a pretty juicy development.
Yeah, it's exactly what you want. And again, these are all steps towards the long game, right? Like maybe Oregon won't flip him today. Maybe they don't flip him tomorrow, but you keep recruiting him. You bring him out for an official visit. Okay. He probably stays interested into the fall. Maybe he comes back and checks a game out. Maybe he comes out when Ohio State's in town. Who knows? That's another thing you got to look at. How many of these guys might come out and watch a Oregon-Ohio State game in Eugene in October? That could be something worth monitoring too. So, yeah, I think in the case of this, it's really tough going after these 5 stars, and you want to get as many of them as you can. When you go after more of them, like Oregon is doing more than they ever have, obviously it ups your chances to get one of them. Not all of them, but it ups your chances to get at least one of them or 2 of them or 3 of them, whatever the number might be. And so with Offord, I think we're kind of like in his recruiting timeline, I think we're really early, even with the official visits. I think this is one where you're kind of setting up that long game and hoping to give yourself a shot in October, November, December, and kind of see what happens. And who knows, long game anymore doesn't necessarily mean just this cycle too. We've seen players jump in the transfer portal in the spring transfer portal after just signing, 2 months or 3 months earlier, or, within that first year. So there's lots of levels here, but yeah, Offord, really good player. He's kind of like DeCorian Moore, where basically like, hey, I'm committed to Ohio State. I'm only looking at a couple schools. I'm not like talking to everybody, and my recruitment's not fully open. So, Oregon is one of few, like a very select couple of schools that actually has a shot with Offord.
And Offord was another guy that I was able to talk to when I was on my trip this past week. And he's talking about how he's just kind of getting to know the coaches still at Oregon. It was important for him to get out there to really get his first feel for the program. But he talked about Dan Lanning, and him being there. Like that stability that he has provided the program is part of the reason that he's interested, because Justin, like there's very few programs that are like really at the top of the sport. I'm not saying Oregon's necessarily one of them just yet, but really, really doing well. And it looks like their coach is going to be there for a while. And Oregon is one of those schools. So that just goes back to a point that you and I have continually harped on, how Dan Lanning's stability and long-term commitment to the Ducks is really going to help. Like just over and over again, the more I hear it, it's just like it's proving that point more and more. And with Naim Offord, he said he's 100% locked in with the Bucks, but at the same time, like within the same answer, he said, but you never know what can happen in those few months. So I thought that was just interesting how kind of quickly the tone can change. Like I'm locked in, but hey, you never know. So it's just, I'm not trying to put his commitment in doubt or anything like that. I'm just trying to let you guys know that it's an interesting impression to get when I'm talking to some of these recruits. The last couple things I'll add here: Ohio State and Oregon are the only two programs that are set to get official visits in June, as of my interview with Offord last week. And then it looks like he's going to also try to take official visits to Auburn, Alabama, and USC in season. So he's going to take those visits to Oregon and Ohio State, and then kind of take a break for a little bit. And he said that Oregon's really good at winning, and they sent eight guys to the league this past draft. So those are part of the reasons. That's part of the reason that Oregon is in the mix here for yet another 5-star.
Yeah. And if you're landing, you got to keep taking your shots, right? I mean, you'll never get any of these guys if you don't take a shot at least. And so that's what they're doing. So hopefully fans are not like, okay, all of a sudden Oregon should land every 5-star that they're going after because they're on the short list. I mean, this is a different animal. I mean, this is a totally different animal when you're recruiting 5-stars that basically aren't even in the Western footprint. So that's what you got to keep in mind.
All right, we got a couple more guys to talk about here, Justin, and then we will get out of here for today's episode of the Ducks Dish podcast. But a lot of these interviews are already over on scoopduck.com. So if you guys haven't checked us out over there, great time to check us out. Try us out for just $1, and you get a month of great premium content from Justin, myself, Steve Wolfong, Chad Simmons. So Scoop Duck is the place to be if you're an Oregon football recruiting fan. Justin, let's go to the trenches now and talk about another big-time player in the 2025 class, and that is 2025 Warner Robins, Georgia defensive lineman Isaiah Gibson, who is currently a verbal commit to USC. I'm trying to find his tape right now, so I'm multitasking a little bit, but I'm assuming you got to read a little bit of my update, so I kind of just wanted to toss it to you and get your thoughts on kind of Oregon staying involved here with, what do you know, a USC commit.
Yeah. And obviously I'll lean on you as the authority there, having the opportunity to talk to him and do that interview. But I mean, this is a guy that, at least from my view and just following his recruitment, he committed to USC, and that's a big get for USC. I know Coach Henderson down there is making some waves, but this is a guy that I was willing to bet big money on that doesn't stick with USC. And at the time, I think you look at Georgia. I think there's no doubt that Georgia is no doubt a serious threat. And honestly, you might even peg them as the favorite if you really wanted to. I know he's committed to USC, but it's good to hear Oregon's in the mix. If he has committed to USC like he is now, it at least shows you that he's willing to kind of think outside the Georgia footprint. It's not like, oh, I'm, from the state of Georgia, I gotta go down the street and go play at Georgia. Obviously, he's open to playing, outside of that territory. Don't blame Oregon for taking a shot here. Of course, got to get him on campus. We know that's where it starts, and we'll see about an official visit, and if that does happen. But I kind of feel like, this is another long game too. You keep working on him and see what happens in the fall. And I don't know kind of what you got from talking to him, but that's just the way I see this recruitment plan.
It's definitely one of those recruitments for sure. I mean, as far as Oregon's chances here, that they've done themselves a favor by staying involved here and continuing to recruit him. He said he hears from Tosh Lapoy a decent amount. Lapoy went out to go see him in Georgia this spring evaluation period, so that's pretty big. And then he also talked about Lapoy and Lanning's resumes and how that kind of carries some weight for him in his recruitment as it pertains to looking at Oregon. The quote that I have here from my interview, he said, "I feel like Georgia, Texas, Alabama, Florida, that's really where football means the most at. Them coming from that to Oregon, I feel like they're bringing that caliber of football to Oregon." So the body of work on Oregon's coaching staff, both past and present, is certainly carrying weight and helping them stay in the mix with some of these just truly elite talents. Gibson is a 5-star and the number 2 edge in the On3 rankings. He's been out to Oregon a couple times. Oddly enough, or coincidentally enough, he visited for the Oregon and USC game this past fall, and Oregon had a pretty darn good defensive performance in that game. He's basically hearing from everybody in the SEC. I mean, when you ask that question, you got to sometimes expect to hear a laundry list of schools, and that's exactly how it was with Gibson. But he is planning to take his official visit to Oregon for the Ohio State game, and I think it's just a recruitment you got to continue to stay involved in. But Oregon fans would obviously love to flip another USC commit. That's for sure.
Yeah, and we talked earlier about some of these guys kind of waiting to see what happens with teams. You very much got to think that that's the case here, right? A defensive line commit, an elite defensive line committed to USC, who's really just not played good defense the last few years. You got to think that's got to be key number one for USC to have a chance at keeping him, is to show that they've improved on defense. And so we'll kind of see if their own performance dictates what happens there. Even if he's still committed in the fall. And I think if you're Oregon, you feel really good that your body of work and your performance on the defensive side of ball and what you've been able to do with defensive line guys and getting them in the NFL will definitely help Oregon. Georgia speaks for itself. Like I said, I think even though he's committed to USC, I think really Georgia's your competition here if you're Oregon.
Yeah, I think that's the case for Isaiah Gibson with Oregon's pursuit here. Obviously, he's one of 3 players from Georgia, along with Justice Terry and Julian Lewis, that are committed to the Trojans. So we'll see if they can hang on to him. But I think if you had to pick one of the 3 that would maybe stick, it'd probably be Julian Lewis, just because of Lincoln Riley's pedigree at quarterback. One last guy to talk about here, Justin, and then we will be wrapped up for today's episode. Let's talk about Galveston, Texas, ball safety Jonah Williams. He has been a huge priority for the Ducks here in the 2025 class, and we've said it a bunch of times, Oregon has to land another top-tier safety this cycle. They were able to get Aaron Flowers in the fold this last cycle. You could also obviously throw Peyton Woodyard in there because he is from the class of 2024 as well. But Jonah Williams is a seriously elite prospect, 6'2", 6'3", kind of in the 205, 210-pound area. And the thing that I learned, one of the biggest things I learned from my trip out to Nashville that I'm surprised I didn't know beforehand, but baseball carries an incredibly big, a lot of weight in this recruitment. He said it's kind of going to be a 50-50 decision between baseball and football, but he said he talks to Mark Wazakowski at Oregon a ton, so that he's doing his part as far as helping Dan Lanning reel in a big recruit. But this is a guy who has legitimate MLB draft aspirations. And I also learned it's going to be really, really difficult for any school to pull him out of the state of Texas. So, of course, that would be A&M and UT as the main contenders here, main competition for Oregon as it pertains to Jonah Williams.
Yeah, I think your point about getting him out of the state of Texas is definitely 100% right. It's going to be really tough to do. It's not impossible, but it's going to be really tough to do. Oregon does have, obviously a strong baseball program, or a good commitment to the baseball program. And then, of course, the football pedigree. Like you said, this is a guy that would step on and be an immediate difference maker for Oregon at safety on defense there. So, I think we both can agree Dan Lanning knows the importance of landing an elite safety like Williams. And at the end of the day, I feel confident that they will do absolutely everything they can to get him. But at the end of the day, you just wonder if Eugene, being 2,000 miles away from the state of Texas, might be the ultimate, barrier for them to get him. But we'll see. He could totally enter the MLB draft too, because like you said, I think he's a top 2 round guy. Maybe he's a first round guy if I remember. But he's a really good baseball prospect too. So, you kind of have to wonder how that'll factor into things as well.
Yeah, and it's crazy too because his older brother Nick was drafted in the 2nd round of the 2012 MLB draft and made his debut with the Phillies in 2017. So shout out to the On3 player bio there for the little tidbit, little nugget there as it pertains to Jonah Williams and baseball. So with safety, you have Jonah Williams, Fahim Delaney, and Trey McNutt, and I think Oregon is heavily involved with all 3 of those guys. But I don't know. I think just you learn the weight. I feel like that was another big point, Justin, is just the weight that Texas carries with in-state recruiting. Like talking to Justin Wells and Eric over at the Inside Texas site, like they kind of just really kind of made that real to me and kind of helped me gauge it a little bit more. So again, that's not to say Oregon can't do it, but man, it is going to be hard to get Jonah Williams out of the state of Texas. And I think that at the same time, though, this is where you look at the foundation that Oregon has set and the history that they have recruiting the state of Texas for a number of years. So you're never going to know unless you try. And Oregon is sure going to try for Jonah Williams because he's going to be in town for an official visit later on this month.
Yeah, I mean, when Mac Brown was at Texas, for years, he used to be able to basically just pick who he wanted out of the state. You know, the old school method of recruiting for him was basically he would offer a kid and they'd commit like within 24 hours or immediately of that offer, and they were able to do that, be selective. And you maybe can't do that today, but it's still that kind of power, like you said, still resonates with Texas and with Texas A&M. Texas A&M is a terrific program, tons of backing. They've been they've. It's pretty crazy because if you look at Texas A&M, they have not played good football for several years under Jimbo Fisher, which is ultimately why they sent him packing and hired Mike Elko. But they were still able to sign elite classes at Texas A&M despite a pretty poor product on the field. So those two programs are massive, and for Oregon to kind of go in there. It's like recruiting a guy from the state of Georgia and trying to peel him away from Georgia. I mean, that is not easy to do. And firsthand, Duck fans know when USC was killing it, was elite, they basically were able to do the same thing in LA or the state of California. If they wanted to offer a kid, they basically could offer a kid and get him to commit that day or the next day. And, Oregon might have been recruiting him for a year only to see him, turn to USC with an offer they got 2 hours ago. And so that just happens. That's just kind of a thing. And again, you know what? If Dan Lanning doesn't try, he's not going to get any of them. So at least don't be mad when some of these guys go to Texas or LSU or Florida or Georgia or whatever, because those are some elite freaking programs Oregon's going up against.
You got to recruit nationally if you're in the situation Oregon's in. You just don't have the same access to talent in your own state that a lot of those top programs do. So it's kind of a blessing and a curse, I guess, being able to recruit nationally, but also having to recruit nationally. And that obviously just goes back to why Oregon has prioritized the talent-rich state of California as much as they have. But Justin, we've hit on a lot of really good stuff here in this pod, man. Nice to kind of put a bow almost on all the guys that I talked to out there in Nashville. But anything else you wanted to add here before we hop on out?
Nope. No, I know we'll have more pods this week, and we've got some official visitors coming to campus this coming weekend. And, we talked about Bryce Foster, but there's going to be a number of others. So just stick with us because the next few weeks are going to have a lot of action and a lot of really good recruiting because guys are coming out to Eugene, Oregon.
Absolutely. So, yeah, make sure you guys lock in with us at scoopduck.com. If you want to find more of Justin, follow him on Twitter/X at jhopkinssd. If you want to find more of me, you can follow me at mtorresports on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Subscribe to the Scoop Duck YouTube channel and share the show. Share the Ducks Dish podcast with your friends, with your family, and with other Duck fans. And then, that'll do it for us. So we'll see you in the next episode of the Ducks Dish podcast.